While I was overseas painting, my parents secretly sold my studio to bankroll my brother's startup. Paint somewhere else, they shrugged. I laughed and asked if they had read the deed. That studio you just sold actually belongs to a federal trust. They froze. My name is Zara. I am 33 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful contemporary painter, I built my own life, but maintained occasional contact. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The crisp Chicago wind hit my face as I stepped out of the taxi. After a 6-month art residency in Paris, I was exhausted, but incredibly eager to get back to my own creative space. My studio was a beautiful, exposed brick building on the edge of the arts district. I had poured my heart into it. I grabbed my heavy suitcases and walked up to the familiar green door. I reached for my keys, but stopped cold. The antique brass lock I loved so much was gone. In its place was a cheap, shiny silver keypad. I blinked, thinking jet lag was playing tricks on my mind. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass and heavy machinery coming from the alley out back. I dropped my bags right there on the sidewalk and sprinted around the corner of the building. My breath caught in my throat. A massive green dumpster sat in the alley filled to the brim with debris, but it was not just broken drywall and old pipes. Sticking out of the top of the pile were pieces of my custom canvas frames. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped closer. Laying right there on top of the garbage was a large abstract painting I had spent 3 months perfecting before I left for France. It was slashed right down the middle with a box cutter. "Hey, what are you doing back here?" a gruff voice called out. I spun around to see a burly construction foreman in a yellow hard hat walking toward me with a clipboard. "What am I doing?" I yelled, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "What are you doing? This is my property. You are destroying my lifework." The foreman frowned and looked down at his clipboard. "Look, lady, I do not know who you are, but you need to clear out. This is an active construction site." I shook my head violently. "No, you have the wrong address. I own this building. I am Zara Williams. You need to stop your crew right now before I call the police." The foreman sighed heavily, pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, and shoved it toward my chest. "Call whoever you want," he said flatly. "We have a legal work order. The property was sold last month. We are gutting the interior for the new owner." I snatched the paper from his hand. My eyes frantically scanned the printed text. It was an official demolition permit. Down at the bottom, next to the property owner line, was a name that made my blood run completely cold. Apex Tech. That was the name of the shell company my brother Marcus had been trying to get off the ground for years. My own brother had somehow bought my studio while I was out of the country. No, that was impossible. He did not have the money, and I certainly never put the building on the market. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother, Eleanor. She picked up on the second ring. "Hello, Zara," she said. Her tone was casual, completely devoid of any warmth or welcome home excitement. "Mom, what is happening?" I demanded, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Why are there construction workers gutting my studio?" There was a brief pause on the line. Then my mother sighed heavily into the receiver, as if my sudden emotional distress was absolutely nothing more than a minor and very predictable annoyance to her otherwise perfectly planned peaceful afternoon. "Stop screaming in public, Zara," she said coldly. "It is extremely ungraceful and embarrassing for us all. We can discuss this situation like civilized adults. Get a cab right now and come directly over to the family house for Sunday dinner. We have some very important family business to explain to you. In the meantime, try to calm down, find a new hobby, and let your brother finally do his real work in peace." She hung up before I could say another single word. I stood alone on the sidewalk staring at my dead phone. My own mother had just dismissed the destruction of my livelihood as a minor inconvenience. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely type. The drive felt like a blur of gray concrete and rising panic. I left my suitcases with the driver and marched up the pristine brick walkway of my parents' colonial home. I did not bother knocking. I pushed the heavy oak front door open and marched straight into the formal dining room. The scene before me made my stomach churn. My father, Reverend Thomas, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. My mother sat to his right, radiating an aura of smug satisfaction. Across from her sat my brother Marcus, looking like a cheap imitation of a tech billionaire in his expensive black turtleneck. Next to him was his wife Chloe, twirling a crystal flute in her manicured hands. They were drinking champagne. A massive spread of roasted lamb and silver platters covered the table. They were celebrating. Not a single head turned with warmth when I entered the room. Nobody asked about my flight. Nobody asked how my 6-month art residency in Paris went. The silence in the room was heavy and completely unbothered by my sudden distressed arrival. "Well, do not just stand there in the doorway, Zara," my father boomed, his voice echoing with the same authoritative tone he used every Sunday at the pulpit. "Sit down and fix yourself a plate. We have some incredibly good news to share with the whole family today." I stayed firmly planted in the doorway, refusing to take a single step further into that room. My eyes locked directly onto Marcus. "You bought my studio!" I demanded, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You sent a demolition crew to gut my building today. How is that even legally possible? I own that property." My father set his champagne glass down with a sharp and highly irritated clink. "Calm your tone down right now, young lady," he scolded me harshly. "You do not own anything anymore. We sold the property to Marcus and his investment group." I stared at him as if he had suddenly grown a second head. "You sold it," I repeated slowly. "You cannot sell something that belongs entirely to me. My name is the only one on the deed." My mother dabbed the corners of her mouth with a white linen napkin. "Actually, Zara, we can." "And we did," she stated matter-of-factly. "Do you remember that awful car accident you had 5 years ago? When you were in a coma for 2 weeks and needed all those emergency surgeries, you signed a general power of attorney over to us so we could handle your mounting medical bills and your apartment lease." My blood ran completely cold. The power of attorney. I had completely forgotten about it. I trusted them to tear that legal document up after I fully recovered. "You used a 5-year-old medical document to steal my real estate?" I asked, my voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "We did not steal anything," my father interrupted, waving his heavy hand dismissively in my direction. "We repurposed an underutilized asset for the greater good of this entire family. You were just using that massive commercial space for finger painting, Zara. It was a complete and utter waste of prime square footage. Marcus here is launching a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform. He needed a legitimate headquarters to secure his next round of venture capital funding. We sold the building to his corporate entity for $1.5 million. It keeps the generational wealth inside the family." I felt the air completely leave my lungs. $1.5 million. That building was easily worth twice that amount in the current real estate market. They had practically given it away to my utterly useless brother. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows elegantly on the table. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive wine and gave me a wildly condescending smile. "Honestly, Zara, you do not need commercial zoning for a little art project, sweetie," she said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "You can paint your little pictures anywhere. Rent a cheap basement or set up a wooden easel in your bedroom. Marcus is building a real company that is going to change the world. It is time for you to grow up and be a supportive sister for once." I looked directly at her smug white face and felt pure disgust. I turned my burning gaze back toward my father. "You sold my property," I said, my voice dangerously calm now. "But what exactly happened to all the money from it?" My father did not even have the decency to look guilty. He picked up his silver fork and cut a piece of lamb. "The funds were transferred directly into the Apex Tech corporate account," he said casually while chewing. Marcus needed liquid capital immediately to secure server space and hire his initial team of developers. It was a seamless transition of assets. I felt physically sick. You gave him $1.5 million of my money. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. Fine. But what about my personal emergency fund? The joint savings account we set up when I first went to college. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and opened my banking app. I had kept that account active for over a decade, steadily depositing a portion of every art commission I earned. It was my safety net for rainy days and slow months. The screen loaded, the bright red text glared back at me. Available balance $0. I stared at the screen. $50,000 was gone. I looked up, my vision blurring with tears of pure anger. "Where's the $50,000 from my savings?" I demanded. My voice cracked, but I did not care. "Did you take that too?" My father wiped his mouth with his napkin and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Do not be so dramatic, Zara," he scolded me. "Real estate transactions come with heavy administrative costs. There were broker fees, attorney retainers, and title transfer taxes that had to be paid up front. We could not let Marcus drain his initial seed money on clerical expenses, so I authorized a withdrawal from our joint account to cover the overhead." "Our joint account," I repeated, my voice rising. "That was my money. I earned every single penny of it, painting murals and doing private commissions. You did not contribute a single dime to that account in 10 years. You stole my life savings to pay the fees for stealing my building." My mother slammed her hand down on the mahogany table, making the crystal glasses rattle. "How dare you accuse your father of theft?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing at me. "We gave you life. We put a roof over your head, fed you, and paid for your expensive braces when you were a teenager. Do you have any idea how much it costs to raise a child in this economy? You owe us far more than a measly $50,000. We consider that money back pay for all the sacrifices we made to keep you comfortable while you played around with paintbrushes." I stood there paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her words. They were actually convincing themselves that robbing their own daughter was an act of parental justice. "You cannot be serious," I whispered. "You are completely bankrupting me. Your father and I have an image to uphold in this community." My mother continued, completely ignoring my distress. "People at the church ask us what our children are doing. Marcus is a CEO now. He is a respectable businessman. What were we supposed to tell them about you? That our 33-year-old daughter is still making a mess with colors in an old warehouse? We did you a favor, Zara. We forced you to face reality." Marcus leaned back in his velvet dining chair and crossed his arms over his chest. A lazy, arrogant smirk spread across his face. "Look, Zara, you need to look at the bigger picture here," he said in that condescending tech bro voice I absolutely despised. "You have been floating through life doing these little craft projects for years. It is cute, but it does not build generational wealth. I am building an artificial intelligence platform that is going to put the Williams family name on the map. When Apex Tech goes public, we will be sitting in the same rooms as real billionaires. You should be thanking me for elevating us." "Thanking you?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Yes, thanking me," Marcus replied smoothly, picking up his champagne glass. "By liquidating your unused assets, you finally get to be a team player. You are practically an angel investor in my company now. Of course, you will not get any equity since Mom and Dad technically provided the capital, but you get the pride of knowing you helped your big brother succeed." Chloe giggled softly and clinked her glass against his. She looked me up and down, taking in my travel-worn clothes. "To family," she chimed in, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. I felt a hot, intense pressure building behind my eyes. They had stripped me of my property, drained my bank account, and were sitting here drinking champagne to celebrate my financial ruin. They thought I was just going to roll over and accept it because I was the quiet artist of the family. They thought I was weak. But the anger that was coursing through my veins was crystallizing into a cold, calculated focus. Just as I turned on my heel to walk out the front door and never look back, Marcus cleared his throat. Oh, before you leave, there is just one more tiny piece of housekeeping we need to take care of, he said. Marcus reached down into the sleek leather briefcase resting by his feet. He pulled out a crisp manila folder and placed it squarely on the table. He slid it across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of me. Inside was a single piece of thick legal paper with several colorful sticky notes pointing to the bottom signature line. It is just a standard quitclaim deed, he said, waving his hand as if it were a restaurant receipt. The title insurance company is being ridiculously pedantic about the transfer. They saw your name on the original deed and are demanding a direct signature to clear up what they are calling a minor administrative hurdle. I stared at the document. My heart, which had been racing just moments ago, suddenly slowed down. A sharp realization pierced through the fog of my anger. The power of attorney they used was not bulletproof. The bank and the venture capital firm saw a loophole, and they wanted my explicit consent before moving forward. They needed me. I had something they desperately wanted. Why do you need my signature if the power of attorney was so perfectly legal? I asked, looking up at him. Marcus rolled his eyes and let out an exaggerated sigh. It is a bureaucratic formality, Zara. My investors are ready to release the next $3 million funding round by the end of the week. But their legal department will not wire the cash until this stupid piece of paper is filed with the county. Just sign the line so we can all move on with our lives. He held out a silver pen toward me. I looked at the pen. I looked at the smug, expectant faces of my family. They truly believed I was stupid enough to sign away my only remaining leverage so my brother could get $3 million while I was left with absolutely nothing. I am not signing that, I said, my voice steady and resolute. Chloe slammed her wineglass down on the table. Are you out of your mind? She snapped, her pale face flushing with sudden anger. You are going to hold up $3 million out of pure petty jealousy. This is exactly why you are still a struggling nobody, Zara. You do not understand how real business works. You are right, Chloe, I replied coldly. I do not understand a business model that relies on robbing family members to pay for startup costs. I will not sign it. You can figure out your own administrative hurdles. My father stood up, his large frame casting a long shadow over the dining table. Do not test my patience, girl, he boomed. You will sign that paper right now. We have already sold the property. It is done. You are only hurting your brother out of spite. It is not spite, it is self-respect. I shot back, taking a step away from the table. I am leaving, and you can expect to hear from my lawyer. Just as my hand touched the brass doorknob, my mother spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was dripping with a chilling venom that stopped me in my tracks. If you walk out that door without signing that paper, you will be dead to this family, she said. But that is not all, Zara. You know how much influence your father and I have in this community. We built that church. We lead the congregation. If you try to sabotage your brother's future, I will make sure every single person in our social circle knows exactly what kind of selfish, bitter person you are. I turned to look at her. She was not bluffing. I will have you excommunicated, she continued, her eyes locking onto mine with ruthless determination. I will tell the church elders that you have lost your mind. I will tell them you are greedy and spiteful. Your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, they will all cut you off. You will have no family. You will have no community. You will be completely alone. Just sign the deed and we can forget this ugly little tantrum ever happened. The silence in the dining room was deafening. They were using the one thing they thought I feared losing the most. My connection to my roots, my family, my community. They expected me to break down. They expected me to cry and beg for their forgiveness before eagerly grabbing the pen to secure their love. But I did not cry. There were no tears left in me. The hollow ache in my chest had completely vanished, replaced by a deep, quiet fury. I looked at the four of them sitting in their beautiful dining room, paid for by the congregation they manipulated, and the daughter they robbed. Do whatever you have to do, Mother, I said calmly. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the crisp evening air, leaving the unsigned document sitting on the table. The door clicked shut behind me, severing my ties to the only family I had ever known. But as I walked down the driveway toward my waiting cab, I did not feel broken. I felt dangerously free. They had taken my studio and my savings. But by demanding my signature, they had just confirmed that I still held the winning card. They just did not realize it yet. I spent the next few days in a quiet hotel downtown, refusing to answer any calls from my family. Sunday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky pouring rain over the Chicago streets. I sat by the window with a cup of bitter black coffee, watching the water streak down the glass. Right around 11 o'clock, my phone sitting on the nightstand vibrated. Then it vibrated again. Within 60 seconds, it began buzzing continuously like an angry hive of bees. I walked over and picked it up. My screen was completely flooded with notifications. They were all text messages from people in my father's congregation. My aunts, my uncles, members of the choir, and the church elders were all suddenly reaching out to me at the exact same time. I swiped open the first message from my Aunt Beatrice. It read, "Zara, I am praying for your soul. How could you let the devil turn your heart against your own flesh and blood? Stop this foolish pride and let your brother have his blessing." I frowned and opened another text, this one from Deacon Hayes. "A good Christian woman supports her family. Do not let greed destroy your father's legacy. Sign the papers, Zara. God is watching." My stomach twisted into a tight knot. I knew exactly what was happening. I opened my laptop and navigated to the church website, clicking on the live stream of the Sunday service. The video buffered for a moment before the grand sanctuary filled my screen. The pews were packed. The stained glass windows cast colorful light across the altar. Standing behind the heavy wooden podium was my father, Reverend Thomas. He was sweating profusely, gripping the edges of the pulpit with both hands as his voice boomed through the speakers. He was performing. It was the climax of his sermon. "We live in a world consumed by selfishness," my father preached, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We raise our children in the light. We feed them. We clothe them. We give them every advantage. And yet sometimes the devil takes root in their hearts. Sometimes a daughter becomes so obsessed with earthly possessions that she tries to sabotage her own brother's righteous path." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the congregation. "Amen," someone shouted from the back. My father wiped his forehead with a white handkerchief. "When God opens a door for the men of this family to build a legacy, to create jobs, to elevate our community, the enemy will always try to shut it," he shouted. And sometimes the enemy is sitting at your own dinner table. Sometimes the enemy is the sister who refuses to move out of the way of progress because she wants it all for her own selfish vanity. I watched in absolute disgust as the camera panned to the front row. My mother Eleanor was sitting there, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch perfectly. Right beside her sat Marcus, looking incredibly solemn and dignified in his tailored suit. Chloe sat next to him, nodding along devoutly as if she had not just mocked my art career at our family dinner. My father was using the sacred pulpit to run a public smear campaign against me. He was weaponizing his congregation to pressure me into signing that quitclaim deed. He was painting Marcus as a visionary martyr, and me as a greedy, rebellious villain, holding back a $3 million blessing from heaven. The live chat next to the video stream was moving a mile a minute. Church members were typing out prayers for my parents and expressing their deep disappointment in me. People I had known since I was a little girl. People who used to praise my paintings and hug me after every Sunday school class. They were all turning on me based on one highly manipulated narrative. My phone buzzed again in my hand. It was a message from my cousin Jamal. "Give Marcus the building, Zara. You are embarrassing the whole family. Do not be so selfish. He needs this more than you do." Then a text from Sister Mary, the head of the women's ministry. "We are gathering a prayer circle for you tonight to cast out your spirit of greed. Call your parents and apologize. It is not too late to do the right thing and sign the deed." The social pressure was incredibly suffocating. This was how my parents maintained their power for decades. If you did not fall in line, they would completely isolate you. They would turn the entire community against you until you broke down and surrendered, just to feel a sense of belonging again. The sheer weight of hundreds of people hating me simultaneously was meant to crush my spirit. I closed the laptop, shutting off my father's booming voice. The silence of my hotel room felt deafening. They had taken my property and my money. Now they had taken my reputation and my community. Any normal person would have caved. Any normal daughter would have grabbed a pen, driven to the church, and signed away her rights just to stop the public humiliation. But as I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading the hateful messages piling up, by the second I did not feel the urge to surrender. I felt liberated. My father had just publicly declared war, and he had no idea that he was bringing a sermon to a legal battlefield. Monday morning arrived with a sharp, bitter chill in the air. I sat at the small wooden desk in my hotel room, drafting a long, detailed email to my attorney. I was ready to outline exactly how we were going to tear my parents' fraudulent sale apart, piece by piece. But before I could hit the send button, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed the name of Julian, the head curator at the Vanguard Gallery. They were one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in Chicago, and I had a massive solo exhibition scheduled with them for next month. It was supposed to be my triumphant return from my Paris residency, a showcase of my best work to date. I answered the phone expecting to discuss gallery lighting arrangements or catering menus. "Hello, Julian," I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite the chaos in my personal life. There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Zara." He finally spoke, his voice tight and nervous. "I do not know how to say this, so I'm just going to be direct. We have to cancel your exhibition." I froze, my fingers hovering awkwardly over my laptop keyboard. "Cancel it," I repeated, completely stunned. "Julian, the opening is in exactly 3 weeks. We have already sent out all the press releases to the media. The artwork is ready to be hung. What do you mean you are canceling it?" "I am so incredibly sorry, Zara," he stammered, sounding genuinely pained. "It is not about the art. Your work is brilliant. But my hands are completely tied on this issue." The board of directors held an emergency meeting early this morning. Why, I demanded, my heart starting to pound aggressively against my ribs. "What did the board say?" Julian took a deep, shaky breath. "You know that our gallery leases this entire floor from the Sterling Real Estate Group, right?" Well, Arthur Sterling himself called the gallery director late last night. He made it very clear that if we moved forward with the Zara Williams exhibition, our lease would not be renewed at the end of the year. He threatened to double our rent immediately, citing some obscure breach of contract clause. He practically threatened to bankrupt the gallery. "Zara, I am so sorry, but we cannot risk losing our space over one show." Arthur Sterling. The name echoed in my mind like a physical blow. Arthur Sterling was a massive real estate tycoon in Chicago. He was also Chloe, my awful sister-in-law's extremely wealthy father. Chloe was not just standing by while my parents stole from me. She was actively weaponizing her family connections to destroy my livelihood. She knew how much the Vanguard exhibition meant to me. She knew it was my biggest career milestone to date, and she had simply picked up the phone, called her rich daddy, and had him crush it out of existence. Before I could even fully process the magnitude of what Julian was telling me, my phone beeped with an incoming call. It was the director of the West End Art Space, a smaller independent gallery where I hosted community workshops. I told Julian I had to go and clicked over to the second line. "Zara," the director said, her voice shaking with apology. "I'm so sorry. We just lost our biggest annual grant. The donors specifically stipulated that we cut all ties with you or they pull the funding immediately. We cannot host your workshop next weekend." I hung up the phone without saying a single word. I set the device down on the desk and stared blankly at the wall of my hotel room. The reality of the situation was entirely suffocating. My parents had used their religious influence to turn my entire community against me. Now Chloe was using her generational wealth and white privilege to systematically dismantle my professional career. They were cutting off every single avenue of support I had. They wanted me broke, isolated, and desperate. They wanted me crawling back to them, begging for mercy. My phone lit up on the desk. It was a text message from a number I knew exactly who it was. The message read, "Heard about your gallery shows. So sad how fast things fall apart. Just sign the paper, Zara. Actions have consequences." It was followed by a bright yellow smiling emoji. Chloe was enjoying this. She was sitting in her luxury condo, sipping expensive wine and playing God with my life. She thought she was untouchable because she came from old money while I was just a struggling artist. She thought her father's real estate empire gave her the right to stomp all over me without any repercussions. I picked up my phone and stared at that smiling emoji. A cold, ruthless energy washed over me, completely replacing the panic. Chloe wanted to play games with real estate. She wanted to use property to threaten people. She had absolutely no idea that she had just walked right into my trap. I did not text her back. Instead, I opened my email, clicked on the draft to my lawyer, and started typing. It was time to let them think they had won. An hour later, my phone buzzed again with a new text message. It was Chloe. She asked me to meet her at an upscale cafe in the Gold Coast neighborhood. She claimed she wanted to clear the air and offer an olive branch between us. I knew it was a trap, but I agreed anyway. It was time to look my enemy directly in the eyes. I grabbed my coat and hailed a cab to the address she provided. The cafe was one of those ridiculously pretentious places where the pastries cost $20 and the patrons whispered while wearing designer sunglasses indoors. I spotted Chloe sitting in a plush velvet booth near the back window. She was wearing a tailored white cashmere sweater and a string of pearls that probably cost more than my first car. When she saw me approach, she offered a tight, condescending smile. She had already ordered an expensive matcha latte for herself and a plain glass of tap water for me. I slid into the booth across from her and folded my hands on the marble table. "Let us skip the pleasantries, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "Why did you ask me to come here?" Chloe sighed gracefully and rested her chin on her hand. "You are always so defensive, Zara," she murmured, shaking her head. "I asked you here because I actually feel sorry for you. Your parents are furious, Marcus is stressed, and you are throwing away your entire life over a stubborn grudge. I want to help you fix this mess before it is too late." "Help me," I repeated, staring at her. "You just had your father threaten 2 major art galleries into canceling my exhibitions. Is that what you call helping?" Chloe waved her manicured hand as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "Oh, please let us not be overly dramatic," she scoffed. "My father is a businessman. He protects his investments. When he found out that a disgruntled family member was trying to sabotage my husband's company, he naturally took steps to isolate the threat. You have to understand, Zara, that the real world does not operate on feelings and finger painting. Real business requires ruthless decisions. Marcus is building something substantial. He is dealing with venture capitalists and tech developers. Your art is a cute distraction, but it does not contribute anything of actual value to society or this family." I sat perfectly still, letting her arrogant words wash over me. She truly believed that her inherited wealth made her vastly superior to my hard-earned talent. But because I am a generous person, Chloe continued, reaching into her designer handbag. "I am willing to offer you a way out of this self-destructive spiral." She pulled out a crisp white envelope and placed it on the marble table. She slowly slid it across the smooth surface until it stopped right in front of me. I looked down. It was a personal check written from her joint account with Marcus. The amount was $10,000. "What is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Consider it an early birthday present," she replied, her smile widening into a triumphant smirk. "Or a relocation fund. Take that $10,000, Zara. Go rent a nice little basement somewhere and buy yourself some fresh canvases. Take a vacation. Clear your head. In exchange, all you have to do is sign the quitclaim deed right now." She pulled the familiar legal document out of her bag and laid it gently next to the check, along with a gold-plated pen. And the galleries? I asked, maintaining my blank expression. Chloe chuckled softly. If you sign the paper and promise to stop this ridiculous tantrum, I will have my father make a phone call this afternoon. Your little art shows will be back on the schedule by dinner time. You see, Zara, you cannot win a war against people who own the battlefield. So take the money, sign the paper, and go back to your quiet little life. I looked at the $10,000 check. It was a fraction of what they had stolen from me. It was hush money designed to make me comply. I looked up at Chloe. Her blue eyes were shining with the absolute certainty that she had just bought my submission. I slowly reached out and picked up the check. Chloe leaned back in her booth, looking thoroughly satisfied. Then, keeping my eyes locked dead onto hers, I pinched the edges of the thick paper. I pulled my hands in opposite directions. The sound of tearing paper was loud and sharp in the quiet cafe. Chloe's smug smile instantly vanished. Her jaw dropped slightly as I stacked the torn halves together and ripped them again. I placed the 4 shredded pieces of the check neatly on top of her unsigned quitclaim deed. Keep your spare change, Chloe, I said, my voice completely calm and devoid of emotion. I do not want your money, and I certainly do not want your pity. You and your father do not own my battlefield. Chloe's face flushed a deep, furious red. Her mask of polite high society charm completely shattered. You stupid, arrogant girl, she hissed, leaning aggressively across the table. You think you are so smart. I tried to be nice to you. I tried to throw you a lifeline. But if you want to play it this way, I swear to God, I will crush you. I will make sure no gallery in this entire state ever looks at your portfolio again. I will make sure you are blacklisted from every art space in Chicago. You will be completely ruined. I stood up from the booth and looked down at her red, angry face. You cannot ruin something you do not understand, I replied smoothly. I turned my back on her and walked out of the cafe, leaving her fuming alone in the velvet booth. The war had officially escalated, and I was finally ready to make my next move. I returned to my hotel room with a new sense of clarity. The fear that had gripped me just a few days ago was completely gone. In its place was a sharp, strategic focus. I sat down at the small desk and opened my laptop, ready to finish the email to my attorney. But before I could type a single word, my cell phone rang. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed a local Chicago number, but it was not one I recognized. I picked it up and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Is this Zara Williams?" a deep male voice asked on the other end of the line. "Yes, this is she." "Who is calling?" "This is Detective Miller with the Chicago Police Department, District 18. I am calling regarding a police report filed earlier this morning by an Eleanor Williams. She is your mother, correct?" My stomach gave a sudden violent lurch, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "Yes, she is my mother. Is everything okay? Has something happened to her? She is fine physically," the detective replied, his tone completely flat and professional. "However, she came into the precinct today to report a grand larceny. A platinum diamond heirloom brooch valued at $25,000 was taken from her master bedroom. According to her statement, you were at the family residence this past Sunday for dinner. She claims you became highly agitated, demanded money, and then left the house abruptly. She is officially naming you as the primary suspect in the theft." I sat perfectly still. The silence in my hotel room was absolute. My own mother had just accused me of a felony. "Detective, that is an absolute lie," I said, gripping the phone tightly. "I was at the house for less than 20 minutes. I never went upstairs. I never went anywhere near her bedroom. We had a verbal argument in the dining room, and I walked straight out the front door." "I understand you are upset, Ms. Williams," Detective Miller said, sounding bored. "But your mother was very specific. She stated that you are currently experiencing severe financial difficulties and that you explicitly threatened the family before storming out. Given the high value of the stolen property, this is a felony investigation. I need you to come down to the precinct this afternoon to make a formal statement. If you do not cooperate, I will have no choice but to issue a warrant for your arrest." The threat hung heavy in the air. A warrant, arrest, jail time. They were actually trying to put me behind bars. "I will be there in an hour," I told the detective, my voice remarkably calm. "Good," he said, and hung up the phone. I lowered the device from my ear and stared at the dark screen. The sheer scale of their cruelty was breathtaking. They were not just trying to take my studio anymore. They were willing to brand me a convicted thief. A felony record would completely destroy my life. No gallery would ever feature a criminal. No landlord would ever rent to me. My entire future would be ruined over a piece of jewelry my mother probably had sitting in her own jewelry box. Right at that moment, my phone vibrated in my hand. A new text message had just arrived. It was from my mother. I opened it and read the words glowing on the screen. "The police are just doing their job, Zara. It breaks my heart to see you go down this dark path. But families can always settle things privately before the law gets too involved. The charges go away the second you sign the deed for your brother. Do not make us do this. Think about your future." I read the message 3 times. It was extortion, plain and simple. Sign over the $1.5 million property or go to prison. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought I would panic, run down to the police station crying, and beg them to drop the charges in exchange for my signature. Instead, I felt a cold smile slowly spread across my face. My parents were so incredibly arrogant. They were so used to controlling the narrative in their church that they forgot how the real world actually worked. They forgot that when you file a false police report, you are committing a crime yourself. And most importantly, they forgot who installed their smart home security system 5 years ago when they could not figure out how to connect the cameras to the wireless network. I still had the master administrative access on my phone. I did not reply to my mother's text. I opened my security camera app and began scrolling through the video archives from Sunday afternoon. It did not take long to find exactly what I needed. I saved the video file directly to a secure cloud drive. Then I picked up my phone and made the most important call of my life. "Yes, hello," I said when the line connected. "I need to hire the best corporate defense attorney you have available immediately. And tell them to meet me at the District 18 Police Precinct. We have a felony fraud case to dismantle." The cab ride to District 18 took less than 20 minutes. I paid the driver in cash and walked through the heavy glass doors of the precinct. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. I approached the front desk and gave the duty officer my name. He picked up his radio and muttered something I could not hear. A few minutes later, a tall man with a receding hairline and a cheap gray suit walked through the double doors leading to the holding area. "Are you Zara Williams?" he asked. I slowly nodded. "Follow me," he said. We walked down a long fluorescent-lit hallway into a small windowless interrogation room. The room was exactly as bleak as they look on television. A steel table bolted to the floor and 2 hard plastic chairs. "You sit down," Detective Miller commanded, pointing to the chair on the far side of the table. I sat down and placed my hands flat on the cold steel surface. Detective Miller did not sit immediately. He paced around the small room, letting the silence stretch in an attempt to make me nervous. I recognized his face now. I had seen him standing in the back pews of my father's church during Sunday service. He was one of the men who always nodded enthusiastically whenever my father preached about authority and obedience. "Your parents are good people, Zara," he finally said, leaning against the locked door. "Reverend Thomas is a pillar of our community. He has guided many lost souls back to the righteous path. It breaks my heart to see his own daughter causing him so much pain and public embarrassment." "I am not here to discuss my father's church attendance, Detective Miller," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I am here because my mother filed a false police report." Detective Miller slammed his hand down on the steel table, making a loud, echoing crack. "Do not play games with me, girl," he shouted, leaning his face close to mine. "You stormed into their house on Sunday, demanded money, and when they refused, you went upstairs and took a $25,000 heirloom. Your mother is devastated. Your father is praying for your soul." They do not want to see you go to prison. They told me you have a chance to make this right. All you have to do is return the property and sign the business papers you owe your brother. He was not even trying to hide the extortion. He was acting as a heavy-handed enforcer for my parents, using his badge to bully me into giving up my $1.5 million property. And if I refuse, I asked, staring directly into his angry eyes. If you refuse, I will book you right now for grand larceny, he threatened. You will be fingerprinted, photographed, and thrown into a holding cell with people who will not care about your fancy art projects. You will stay there until the judge sets a bail you cannot afford. You will have a felony record. Your career will be completely over. Is your stubborn pride really worth throwing your entire life away? I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It had been exactly 30 minutes since I made my phone call. I took a slow, deep breath and leaned back in the hard plastic chair. Book me. Then, I said calmly. Detective Miller blinked, his confidence faltering for just a fraction of a second. You think I am bluffing? He asked, reaching for the handcuffs clipped to his belt. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for grand theft. He grabbed my arm and roughly pulled me to my feet. Just as the cold metal of the handcuffs brushed against my wrist, the heavy door of the interrogation room swung open. It hit the wall with a loud bang. Detective Miller spun around angrily. I am in the middle of an interview, he snapped. You are in the middle of a massive civil rights lawsuit, detective, a sharp, authoritative voice replied. A woman stepped into the dreary room. She was currently wearing a flawless, tailored navy blue suit and carrying a slim leather briefcase. Her heels clicked sharply against the linoleum floor. She possessed an aura of absolute, ruthless power that instantly made the detective take a quick step back. Let go of my client right now, she demanded, her voice cutting the room like a sharpened blade. My name is Victoria Vance. I am senior partner at Sterling and Hayes. You have 10 seconds to remove your hands from Ms. Williams before I have your badge, your pension, and your entire career dismantled for unlawful detainment and police coercion. Detective Miller dropped the handcuffs as if they had suddenly caught fire. He took a stumbling step backward, his face draining of all color. Victoria Vance did not even look at him. She walked smoothly to the steel table and pulled a small silver USB drive from her tailored pocket. She dropped it onto the metal surface with a sharp, definitive click. What is that? Detective Miller asked, his voice losing all its previous aggressive bravado. That is the absolute end of your career if you do not listen to me very carefully, Victoria replied smoothly. My client is entirely innocent of these fabricated charges. On that drive is high-definition security footage downloaded directly from the cloud server of the Williams family residence. It is time-stamped exactly 2 hours before Eleanor Williams walked into this precinct. The video clearly shows Eleanor taking off the platinum diamond brooch, placing it inside a small velvet box, and locking it securely inside the floor safe hidden beneath her bedroom closet carpet. Detective Miller stared at the silver drive. A heavy bead of sweat rolled down his temple. My client was not even in the house at that time, Victoria continued, her voice echoing in the small, dreary room. In fact, the exterior camera footage, also included on that drive, confirms that my client left the property on Sunday and never returned. Eleanor Williams filed a knowingly false police report to extort my client into signing over a $1.5 million commercial real estate property. And you, detective, acted as the muscle for this extortion attempt without conducting even a basic preliminary investigation. I did not know, Detective Miller stammered, holding his hands up defensively. Reverend Thomas told me it was a standard domestic dispute. I was just trying to help the family settle things quietly. You were trying to intimidate a woman into giving up her assets under the threat of a fraudulent felony conviction, Victoria corrected him sharply. The charges are dropped immediately. You will expunge this arrest record from the system before I even walk out of this building. If you or anyone in your department contacts my client again, I will bring the full weight of my firm down on this precinct. Do you understand me? Yes, Detective Miller whispered, wiping his forehead. I understand completely. The charges are dropped. You are free to go, Ms. Williams. Victoria turned to me and offered a brief professional nod. Let us get out of here, Zara. I stood up from the hard plastic chair, massaging my wrists, where the cold metal cuffs had almost locked around them. I walked out of the interrogation room, leaving the humiliated detective staring blankly at the wall. We walked down the fluorescent-lit hallway and stepped out through the heavy glass doors into the crisp Chicago afternoon. The air had never tasted so sweet. Victoria walked beside me to a sleek black town car waiting at the curb. We have them dead to rights, Zara, Victoria said as we stood on the sidewalk. Filing a false police report is a serious offense. Extortion is even worse. I can have the paperwork drafted by tonight. We can sue your parents for severe emotional distress and have your mother facing criminal charges by the end of the week. They handed us the perfect weapon. I looked out at the busy street, watching the yellow cabs speed by. Any normal person would have leaped at the chance to strike back. A lawsuit would definitely punish them, but a lawsuit would also freeze the property transfer. It would stop Marcus from getting his investor money. It would give them a chance to back out and play the victims again. No, I said quietly. Do not file the lawsuit. Victoria raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. You want to let them get away with trying to throw you in a holding cell? They are not getting away with anything, Victoria, I replied, turning to face her. Suing them for a false police report is entirely too small. It is a slap on the wrist. I want them to feel exactly what they tried to make me feel. I want them to lose everything they value. I want them to feel the absolute panic of having their entire world collapse with no way out. Hold off on the lawsuit. We are sticking to the original plan. Victoria studied my face for a long moment before a slow, dangerous smile spread across her lips. Understood, she said. I will finalize the trap on my end. Call your brother. I climbed into the back seat of the town car and pulled out my phone. I dialed Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. Well, well, Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. Have you finally come to your senses after your little chat with the police? I forced my voice to tremble slightly, perfectly, playing the role of the defeated sister. You win, Marcus, I whispered, sounding entirely broken. Tell Mom to drop the charges. I will sign the quitclaim deed tomorrow. Marcus laughed, a loud, triumphant sound. I knew you would finally see reason, Zara. I will text you the address of the notary. Do not be late. He hung up the phone. I leaned back against the plush leather seats and smiled. The trap was set, and the countdown had officially begun. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was a brilliant, clear blue. I arrived at the address Marcus had texted me exactly 5 minutes early. It was a sleek glass building in the financial district housing an exclusive high-end notary and legal services firm. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and took the elevator up to the 40th floor. When I stepped into the sprawling marble lobby, my family was already waiting. They looked like they were dressed for a victory parade. Marcus was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire first year of college tuition. Chloe stood next to him, draped in a cream-colored designer trench coat, her blonde hair perfectly blown out. Even my parents had dressed up for the occasion. My father wore his best Sunday preaching suit, and my mother clutched a recognizable luxury handbag. When they saw me walk through the glass doors, their collective expressions shifted into identical looks of overwhelming smugness. They saw my simple black slacks and plain gray sweater, and immediately assumed I was completely broken. Well, look who finally decided to join the real world, Chloe said with a sharp little laugh. She looked me up and down with obvious pity. I am glad you decided to stop throwing a tantrum, Zara. This is so much better for everyone. My mother stepped forward, adjusting the collar of her expensive blazer. It takes a lot of maturity to admit when you are wrong, Zara, she said, her voice dripping with that familiar fake maternal warmth. I told your father that you would eventually learn your place. You just needed a little push to see the bigger picture. I have already called Detective Miller to drop the unfortunate misunderstanding from yesterday. See how easy things can be when you just obey your family. I did not respond to either of them. I kept my face entirely blank, a perfect, unreadable canvas. Let us just get this over with, I said quietly, keeping my eyes fixed on the receptionist desk. Marcus smirked and gestured toward a private glass-walled conference room. After you, little sister, he sneered. We walked into the conference room where a sharply dressed notary public was waiting at the head of a long mahogany table. The notary pushed a thick manila folder across the polished wood. Inside was the exact same quitclaim deed Marcus had thrown at me during Sunday dinner. I pulled out the chair and sat down. I picked up the document and began to read. I read every single line very carefully. I felt the heavy, impatient stares of my family boring into the side of my head. Marcus tapped his expensive leather shoes against the floor. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh of annoyance. They thought I was hesitating out of grief or fear. They had absolutely no idea that I was actually reading the text to verify that the specific legal phrasing of the transfer remained exactly as I needed it to be. The clause was there. By signing this document, I was legally transferring all my current interest in the property directly to Apex Tech, making Marcus the sole and primary occupant, holding all associated liabilities. It was perfect. It was a beautifully crafted death warrant for his company. Are you going to read it all day, or are you going to sign it? Marcus snapped, crossing his arms over his chest. My investors are waiting for my confirmation call. Time is money, Zara. Not that you would understand that. I picked up the heavy black pen resting next to the paper. I did not look up at him. I simply pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line and signed my name with smooth, deliberate strokes. I pushed the paper back across the table toward the notary. The notary stamped it with a loud, definitive thud. It is legally binding, the notary announced, handing the folder to Marcus. Marcus snatched the folder with greedy, eager hands. A massive, triumphant grin spread across his face. He actually let out a loud cheer. He did not even bother to thank me. He immediately pulled his sleek smartphone from his pocket and dialed a number, walking toward the large glass windows overlooking the city. Yes, Richard, he said loudly into the phone, making sure I could hear every single word. The minor administrative hurdle has been completely cleared. The property title is 100% secure and legally transferred to Apex Tech. We hold full rights to the building. You can wire the $3 million funding round this afternoon. Chloe clapped her hands together in delight and hugged my mother. My father clapped Marcus on the back, beaming with overwhelming pride. They were celebrating their massive victory, completely ignoring my presence in the room. They had successfully bullied, blackmailed, and stolen their way to the top. I quietly pushed my chair back and stood up. Nobody even looked my way as I walked out of the conference room. Let them celebrate, I thought as I stepped back into the elevator. Let them drink their expensive champagne and cash their massive checks. Because the higher they climbed, the harder the impact would be when gravity finally caught up with them. 3 days passed in absolute silence. I did not hear a single word from my parents or my brother. I spent my time in a rented loft, setting up a temporary workspace and organizing my portfolio. I knew exactly what Marcus was doing. Flush with his new $3 million venture capital deposit, he was moving at lightning speed. He wanted to gut my beautiful historic studio and transform it into a sterile glass and steel tech hub as quickly as possible to impress his board of directors. It was a Thursday morning when the trap finally snapped shut. I was not there to see it happen, but my lawyer Victoria had eyes on the ground. She later described the entire glorious scene to me in vivid detail. Marcus had hired a massive non-union demolition crew, paying them double time to rip out the interior of my building. He and Chloe were standing on the sidewalk across the street, drinking expensive lattes and wearing matching white hard hats. They were pointing at the exposed brick walls as a small bulldozer smashed through the original 19th century wooden floorboards. Marcus was probably dreaming about his upcoming magazine covers. He was the brilliant young CEO building his empire on the ashes of his sister's pathetic little art career. Then the heavy rumble of the bulldozer was suddenly drowned out by the piercing shriek of sirens. A fleet of vehicles abruptly turned the corner and completely blocked off the street. There were two black SUVs and three large white vans bearing the official seals of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Illinois State Historical Society. The doors swung open before the vehicles even came to a complete stop. More than a dozen federal agents and state inspectors swarmed the construction site, wearing high-visibility jackets and carrying thick clipboards. A man with a silver badge hanging around his neck grabbed a bright red bullhorn. "Turn off the machinery right now!" he ordered, his voice echoing violently down the block. "Step away from the equipment and clear the building immediately." The demolition crew panicked. They immediately killed the engines and dropped their heavy tools. The sudden silence that fell over the dusty construction site was deafening. Marcus spilled his latte all over his expensive leather shoes. He ripped off his hard hat and marched across the street, his face red with total indignation. "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" he shouted at the man with the silver badge. "I am the CEO of Apex Tech. We own this building. We have all the proper city permits for a standard commercial remodel. You are trespassing on private property and costing me thousands of dollars by the minute." The lead agent turned to face my brother. He did not look impressed by the tailored suit or the arrogant tech bro attitude. "Are you Marcus Williams?" the agent asked, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase. "Yes, I am," Marcus snapped, puffing out his chest. "And if you do not get your people off my site right now, my father-in-law Arthur Sterling will have your job by the end of the day." The agent completely ignored the threat. He shoved the heavy stack of papers directly into my brother's chest, forcing Marcus to grab them before they fell to the dirt. "Marcus Williams, you are hereby served with a federal cease and desist order," the agent stated loudly. "You are in direct violation of the National Historic Preservation Act and multiple environmental protection mandates." Marcus stared down at the papers in sheer confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "This is just an old warehouse." "It is a federally protected heritage site," the agent corrected him, his tone turning sharp and completely unforgiving. "The foundation you are currently destroying was an undocumented but officially verified stop on the Underground Railroad. It was placed into an irrevocable federal historical trust 2 years ago." Chloe, who had just rushed over to stand next to Marcus, let out a sharp gasp. "A trust," she repeated, her voice trembling. "No, that is impossible. We just cleared the title. We have the quitclaim deed from the previous owner." The agent looked at Chloe with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. "A quitclaim deed only transfers the rights of the occupant," he explained coldly. "It does not override a federal trust. You do not own this building. You never did. You merely assumed the liability of the lease. And by initiating unauthorized demolition on a protected historical site, you have just triggered a massive federal investigation." Marcus stood frozen in the settling dust. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and terrified. He looked down at the demolished 19th-century floorboards that his bulldozer had just ripped apart. He finally realized that the minor administrative hurdle he forced me to sign away was actually a loaded gun, and he had just pulled the trigger himself. "Secure the perimeter," the agent shouted to his team. "Nobody touches a single brick until the federal investigators arrive." The construction workers hastily packed their bags and fled the scene, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a federal crime. Marcus and Chloe were left standing alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by government agents and yellow crime scene tape. The shiny new headquarters of Apex Tech was now an active federal crime scene. My brother had his $3 million funding, but he had just bulldozed a national monument to get it. I was standing in the middle of my temporary loft, mixing a vibrant shade of cobalt blue on my palette, when my cell phone shattered the quiet room. It was vibrating so violently against the wooden table that it nearly rattled off the edge. I glanced at the screen. It was Marcus. I took my time wiping the wet paint from my hands with a rag before picking up the device and swiping the answer button. "Zara, what the hell did you do?" Marcus screamed into the receiver. His voice was completely frantic, cracking with panic. The confident, arrogant tech CEO from the notary office was entirely gone. I stepped away from my canvas and walked toward the large loft windows looking out over the city. I did not do anything, Marcus. I replied, my voice perfectly smooth and unbothered. I have been painting all morning. Do not lie to me, he yelled, breathing heavily, as if he had just sprinted a mile. The Environmental Protection Agency just raided my construction site. They brought state historical inspectors with them. They shut down the entire operation and kicked my crew off the property. Did you call them? Did you submit a fake tip that the building was full of asbestos just to stall my project? Tell me you called them, Zara. Tell me this is just one of your petty revenge stunts. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. I did not call anyone, Marcus, I said. I did not need to. Federal monitoring systems tend to trigger automatically when a registered historical site is subjected to unauthorized heavy demolition. There was a loud, scuffling sound on the other end of the line, followed by Marcus cursing. Then a new voice pierced through the speaker. It was Chloe, and she was absolutely hysterical. "Listen to me, you bitter little failure!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in my ear. "I do not know what kind of ghetto trick you think you just pulled, but you are going to fix this right now. You are going to pick up the phone, call those federal agents, and tell them you made a mistake. You are going to tell them you lied. Do you have any idea what my father is going to do to you when he finds out you sabotaged his investment? He will have you buried under so many lawsuits you will never see the sun again." I listened to her unhinged ranting with a deep sense of satisfaction. The polished high society mask had completely slipped off, revealing the ugly, terrified bully hiding underneath. She was used to snapping her fingers and having all of her problems disappear. She was used to intimidating people with her wealth and her status. But none of that mattered against the federal government. "You cannot sue someone for your own negligence, Chloe," I replied coldly. "And this is not a trick. This is the reality of commercial real estate. Something your highly experienced father should have taught you before you decided to play business with my property." "What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded, having apparently snatched the phone back from his screaming wife. "What heritage site? We have the title. We have the deed. The property is completely clear. We use the power of attorney." "You have the leasehold, Marcus," I corrected him. "You assumed the rights and liabilities of the occupant. But if you had actually acted like a real business professional instead of a spoiled child playing with venture capital money, you would have done your due diligence." "Tell me, Marcus, when you processed the title transfer, did you order a new comprehensive geological and historical survey of the land?" The silence on the line was thick and heavy. "Of course you did not," I continued, my tone dropping to a sharp reprimand. "Those comprehensive surveys cost about $10,000 and take 3 weeks to clear. You were too cheap and too desperate to get your hands on that $3 million investor check. You wanted to skip the line. You bypassed the full survey and relied on the outdated boilerplate reports from 20 years ago." Marcus let out a ragged, desperate breath. "Zara, please," he whispered, his anger rapidly dissolving into pure terror. "What is in the survey? What did I miss?" "You missed the fine print," I told him simply. "The fine print that details the property's induction into an irrevocable federal historical trust. The fine print that clearly states the original foundation cannot be altered, disturbed, or destroyed by any occupant without an act of Congress. You brought bulldozers to a national monument, Marcus. You did not just break a local zoning law. You committed a severe federal offense. But you signed the quitclaim deed," he pleaded, his voice breaking completely. "You gave it to us. You said it was ours. You signed the paper right in front of us." "I gave you exactly what you asked for," I replied. "You demanded the property. You demanded the liability. You forced my hand and threatened my freedom. And now you get to deal with the absolute weight of the federal government. Have a wonderful afternoon, Marcus. I have to get back to my painting." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear Chloe screaming something unintelligible in the background, begging me not to hang up, but I simply pressed the end call button. I tossed the phone back onto the wooden table and picked up my paintbrush. The silence in the loft returned, wrapping around me like a warm, comforting blanket. The first domino had officially fallen, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop the rest from crashing down. Bad news travels incredibly fast in the corporate world, especially when federal agents are involved. By early Friday morning, the story of the Environmental Protection Agency raiding a commercial construction site had made its way to the local Chicago business blogs. I did not have to leave my loft to know exactly what was happening, because Victoria was giving me hourly updates. The venture capital firm that had promised Marcus the $3 million funding round had a strict zero-tolerance policy for legal liabilities. Their compliance department flagged the federal cease and desist order within hours of the raid. The massive wire transfer Marcus had been bragging about to everyone was instantly and permanently frozen. This financial freeze created an immediate catastrophe for my brother. He had already hired a team of expensive software developers, rented high-capacity cloud servers, and booked the grand ballroom at a luxury downtown hotel for his upcoming launch gala. He had done all of this on the promise of that venture capital money. Now his corporate accounts were completely dry, and his contractors were aggressively demanding their upfront payments. The panic in his camp reached an absolute boiling point by Friday afternoon. I learned from Victoria that Marcus had taken out a massive short-term bridge loan to cover his early demolition costs and the lavish party expenses. Because Marcus had no real credit history or actual assets of his own, the massive loan had been co-signed by his wealthy father-in-law, Arthur Sterling. When Arthur saw the news reports about federal agents shutting down the project, he summoned Marcus directly to his downtown real estate office. Faced with the terrifying wrath of a billionaire, Marcus did what he always did best. He lied. He stood in front of Chloe's intimidating father and claimed the raid was just a minor bureaucratic misunderstanding over an outdated zoning permit. He promised Arthur that the issue would be completely cleared up by Monday morning and the venture capital money would flow right back into his accounts. It was a desperate, pathetic lie designed to save his bruised ego and keep Arthur from immediately withdrawing his financial support. Marcus was digging his own grave deeper with every single word he spoke. To fix this massive lie, Marcus desperately needed a scapegoat. He needed me to somehow reverse the federal mandate or take the blame for the historical trust. The harassment started immediately, and it was relentless. My old cell phone, which I had wisely turned off and tossed into a drawer, began receiving hundreds of voicemails. My mother left messages fluctuating wildly between angry demands and weeping hysterical pleas. My father sent emails threatening divine retribution and demanding I present myself at the church for discipline. Chloe even showed up at my old apartment complex screaming at the bewildered property manager to let her into my unit. But they found absolutely nothing. I had completely vanished from their world. I had moved into a highly secure building under a corporate alias set up by Victoria. I ignored every single attempt at contact. They mobilized the entire church congregation to hunt me down, calling my old college friends and harassing my former landlords. They were running out of time and completely losing their minds, trying to find the quiet sister they thought they could manipulate into fixing their crimes. Despite the impending financial collapse, Marcus made a fatal, arrogant decision. He refused to cancel the Apex Tech launch gala scheduled for that Saturday night. Canceling the highly publicized event would signal to his investors and to Arthur Sterling that the company was in real trouble. He chose to maintain the illusion of success, hoping he could fake it until he miraculously figured a way out of the federal charges. He wanted to stand on a stage in front of the Chicago elite and pretend he was a visionary genius. It was the perfect setting for my final act. On Saturday morning, a private courier delivered a thick, gold-embossed envelope to my temporary loft. It was an exclusive VIP invitation to the gala secured by Victoria through her extensive corporate network. I looked at the glossy card bearing my brother's stolen company logo and smiled. I walked over to the closet and pulled out the custom-designed $15,000 dark silk gown I had purchased during my time in Paris. I ran my hand over the expensive fabric, feeling the weight of the moment. They had spent the entire week frantically searching for the poor, helpless artist they thought they could bully into submission. Marcus wanted a massive audience to witness his fake success. Tonight, I was going to give him exactly what he wanted, and they were finally going to find me. I arrived at the hotel just after 8 o'clock. Marcus used Arthur Sterling's bridge loan to fund this massive ego trip. Valets rushed to open doors for the Chicago elite. I stepped out of my car, and the crisp night air caught the dark silk of my custom gown. I walked up the wide marble steps. Two large security guards stood at the entrance checking names. I handed them the gold-embossed invitation Victoria secured for me. The guards scanned the barcode, nodded respectfully, and pulled open the heavy brass doors revealing the party inside. The grand ballroom was a spectacular display of borrowed wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of guests. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos navigated the busy crowd carrying silver trays loaded with champagne flutes. I stood near the back entrance, letting the shadows conceal me as I scanned the room. Marcus had invited everyone who mattered. I spotted Deacon Hayes and several other church elders standing near the ice sculpture looking deeply impressed. Across the room, Arthur Sterling was holding court with a group of rich real estate tycoons laughing loudly at a joke. My parents were stationed near the front stage playing their roles perfectly. My father was shaking hands and smiling broadly while my mother laughed at jokes and sipped her wine. They looked completely relaxed, projecting an image of total confidence to mask the absolute panic they had been living in all week. Chloe was hovering near the steps of the main stage, checking her phone frantically every few seconds. She was likely still waiting for some miraculous email saying the federal investigation had been dropped. It was a room entirely built on lies and fragile egos. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The lights dimmed slightly, and a dramatic spotlight illuminated the grand stage. The crowd grew quiet, directing their attention forward. Marcus walked out from behind a velvet curtain clutching a sleek, wireless microphone. He was wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo. But from where I stood, I could see the slight tremor in his hand and the nervous sweat glistening on his forehead under the bright stage lights. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus began, his voice echoing loudly. He paced across the stage, adopting the arrogant posture of a visionary tech founder. "We stand on the edge of a new era. Apex Tech is not just a company. It is a revolution in artificial intelligence. We have the team, we have the vision, and we have the premier headquarters to make it all happen." A polite round of applause rippled through the audience. Marcus soaked it in his chest, puffing out with pride. He was actually doing it. He was standing in front of billionaires and community leaders, completely lying through his teeth about his headquarters. Of course, true innovation always faces minor administrative hurdles. Marcus continued, offering the crowd a practiced, humble smile. Some people try to stand in the way of the future out of jealousy or ignorance. But we do not let small obstacles stop us. We push forward, we conquer, and we build our legacy. He raised his hand, preparing to deliver his massive closing statement. It was the exact right moment. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly into the center aisle of the ballroom. I did not try to sneak in. I walked with my head held high, the dark silk of my $15,000 gown trailing elegantly behind me. The fabric caught the dim light, shimmering like liquid glass with every deliberate step I took. I looked nothing like the struggling, invisible artist my family had relentlessly mocked for years. I looked like money. I looked like undeniable power. A woman standing near the back row turned around and gasped loudly. Her reaction caused the people next to her to turn and look. Like a wave crashing through the room, heads began to swivel toward the center aisle. The murmurs started instantly. People from the church recognized my face, but could not reconcile it with the glamorous, powerful woman walking past them. My mother turned around and the wine glass literally slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor. Marcus saw the commotion. His eyes locked onto me from the stage. The arrogant, confident smile melted off his face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He lowered the microphone slowly. His mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. The whispered conversations died out completely as every single person in the massive ballroom turned their heads to stare at me. The music stopped playing. The entire room went absolutely dead silent, waiting for my very next move. It was the perfect beginning to his total and complete downfall. I kept my eyes locked on my brother as I took another slow step toward the stage. The silence in the grand ballroom was so profound, I could hear the faint rustle of my silk gown against the marble floor. Marcus stood entirely paralyzed, clutching the microphone like a lifeline. He was trapped. But before I even reached the front row, something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. Lining the perimeter of the room were dozens of sleek black easels displaying large framed abstract canvases. I changed my trajectory and walked gracefully toward the closest display. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide, clear path for me. I stopped in front of a massive canvas filled with vibrant splashes of crimson and deep cobalt blue. My breath hitched in my chest for a fraction of a second. I knew every single brushstroke on that canvas. I knew exactly how long it took the oil paint to dry. It was one of the pieces I had left in my studio before leaving for Paris. It was the exact same painting the construction crew had thrown into the green dumpster just a few days ago. I turned my head and looked at the next easel, and the next one. There were at least 15 of my original paintings beautifully framed and illuminated by expensive gallery lights. Marcus had not thrown my work away like he claimed. He had secretly salvaged my trash from the dumpster. I looked down at the small gold plaque mounted beneath the crimson painting. It read, Apex Tech Artificial Intelligence Neural Network Generation Alpha. A cold, sharp laugh escaped my lips, breaking the heavy silence in the room. I turned back to face the stage. Marcus was gripping the podium, his knuckles entirely white. Artificial intelligence, I projected my voice clearly and confidently, so it carried to the very back of the ballroom. Is that what we are calling this now, Marcus? You told these wealthy investors that your revolutionary software generated these masterpieces. You stood on this stage and claimed your brilliant code painted these canvases. An uncomfortable murmur swept through the crowd of elite guests. Arthur Sterling stepped forward, his brow deeply furrowed in confusion. Marcus stammered into the microphone, trying to regain control. Zara, stop this right now, he begged, his voice cracking. Security, please escort this woman out of the building. She is having a severe mental breakdown. The two burly security guards from the entrance started jogging down the aisle, but Arthur Sterling raised his hand, stopping them in their tracks. Let her speak, Arthur commanded, his voice booming with authority. If this is a mental breakdown, I want to hear exactly what she has to say about the product my money is funding. Thank you, Arthur, I said, offering him a polite nod. I walked up to the centerpiece painting standing right in front of the stage. My brother is selling you a completely fraudulent company. Apex Tech does not have a functioning artificial intelligence platform. He does not have revolutionary software. What he does have is a team of construction workers who dug these canvases out of a dumpster last Monday. These paintings are not generated by a computer. They are generated by me. That is a ridiculous lie, Marcus shouted, his panic completely taking over. Do not listen to her. She is a failed artist who is just jealous of my success. I wrote the code myself. I have the digital files to prove the algorithm created every single brushstroke on those displays. You are a terrible liar, Marcus, I replied smoothly. I reached out and gripped the heavy wooden frame of the crimson painting. Any real artist will tell you that true authenticity cannot be replicated by a machine. And any real artist knows exactly how to protect their work from thieves. I dug my fingernails under the bottom right corner of the canvas, right where the thick fabric met the backing of the custom frame. With one sharp, aggressive tug, I pulled the canvas away from the wood. A loud tearing sound echoed through the silent room. Marcus let out a panicked gasp and dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening screech. I folded the corner of the thick canvas backward, exposing the raw, unpainted edge underneath. I held it up so the bright gallery spotlight hit it perfectly. Right there, hidden beneath the frame edge, written in bold black ink, was my distinct signature, Zara Williams, and right below it was the date of completion, October of last year, months before Apex Tech even existed. I turned to the investors standing in the front row. Check the others, I invited them, gesturing to the beautiful easels lining the entire room. Every single one of these paintings has my exact name signed underneath the frame. Your brilliant visionary chief executive officer did not invent a revolutionary neural network. He simply framed his sister's stolen property and invited you all here tonight to pay for it. The resulting gasps from the wealthy crowd were absolutely deafening. Marcus stared at the exposed signature as if it were a venomous snake. He opened his mouth, but all that came out was a series of pathetic stammering noises. He looked at the wealthy investors and then back at me, completely unable to formulate a single coherent lie. The brilliant tech CEO persona had entirely evaporated in front of his elite audience, leaving behind nothing but a terrified fraud sweating profusely under the bright stage lights. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the microphone again. Seeing her husband completely crumbling, Chloe sprinted up the stairs of the main stage. Her high heels clicked frantically against the polished wooden boards. She snatched the dropped microphone from the floor. The feedback gave a sharp squeal before her voice took over. "Ladies and gentlemen, please do not be alarmed," she announced, forcing a calm, patronizing tone that violently contrasted with her visibly shaking hands. "What you are witnessing right now is a tragic family crisis. My sister-in-law Zara has a long documented history of severe mental instability. She is currently experiencing a manic episode." Chloe paced the stage, pointing an accusing finger directly at me. She leaned into the microphone, weaponizing her tears and playing the victim. She is a struggling artist who has always been desperately jealous of Marcus. When she found out about the massive success of Apex Tech, she completely snapped. She snuck into this ballroom earlier today and vandalized our authentic displays with her own name just to create this pathetic public scene. This is nothing more than a desperate attempt to extort a genius. She needs psychiatric help, not an audience. My father, Reverend Thomas, realized Chloe was losing the crowd. The venture capitalists in the front row were whispering to each other, clearly not buying the ridiculous vandalism story. He stepped forward, moving past the front row of VIP guests with heavy, authoritative strides. He projected his deep preaching voice across the ballroom, entirely bypassing the microphone. "This is a private family tragedy," he boomed, his face set in a mask of righteous sorrow. "We love our daughter, but we cannot allow her sickness to ruin this monumental evening. Security, please restrain her and remove her from the premises immediately. Her mother and I will handle getting her into a proper medical facility tonight." The two large security guards who had been hesitating at the edge of the room finally started moving toward me. Their expressions were stern and highly focused. They were preparing to physically grab me and drag me out into the cold Chicago night to protect the peace of the corporate event. The tension in the room reached an absolute boiling point. Guests were pulling out their smartphones to record the spectacular meltdown. Whispers of shock and outrage filled the massive space. My mother was openly weeping into a tissue, playing the role of the devastated matriarch to absolute perfection. They were deploying their ultimate defense mechanism, gaslighting, isolating, and labeling me as crazy to invalidate my truth. Any normal person would have panicked in that moment. Any normal person would have tried to fight the guards or scream back at the horrible lies being broadcasted to the entire city elite. But I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or offer a single tear. I simply turned my back on the approaching guards and walked purposefully toward the audiovisual control table situated right at the edge of the main stage. Arthur Sterling, standing in the front row, saw my deliberate movement. He held up his hand directly in the path of the advancing security guards. "Stop!" he commanded them, his voice cutting through the chaos with the heavy weight of a billionaire who literally owned the hotel building. Do not touch her. I want to see exactly what she is doing. The guards froze immediately, obeying the man who ultimately signed their paychecks. I reached the AV table where a young, terrified technician was sitting behind a massive soundboard and the main presentation laptop. The laptop was currently projecting the sleek Apex Tech logo onto the giant screen behind Marcus and Chloe. I leaned over the table. "Excuse me?" I said to the technician, my voice completely steady and polite. "I am going to need to borrow that display cable for just a moment." Before he could protest or even move, I reached past him and unplugged the primary cord from the presentation computer. I pulled my cell phone from the hidden pocket of my silk gown. I had already prepared the specific adapter I needed for this exact moment. While my father was still shouting at Arthur Sterling to let the guards do their job, and Chloe was still rambling frantically into the microphone about my supposed mental illness, I plugged the display cable directly into my device. I tapped the screen exactly once. The giant projection screen behind the stage flickered black for a split second. Then it violently flashed back to life, ready to illuminate the entire grand ballroom with the undeniable proof they had tried so hard to bury forever. The massive high-definition projector threw a glaring white light across the stage. Marcus was forced to shield his eyes as the image stabilized behind him. It was not a slide about artificial intelligence or a graph showing projected quarterly earnings. It was a scanned copy of a legal document. The words "quitclaim deed" were printed in bold black letters across the top of the screen. My signature sat perfectly legible on the bottom line. I turned away from the terrified technician and walked back to the center of the stage. The microphone Marcus had dropped was still lying on the polished wood. I leaned down, picked it up, and tapped it once. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. "Take a good look at the screen, everyone," I instructed, my voice steady and unwavering. "That document is the true foundation of Apex Tech. My family did not raise capital through brilliant innovation or savvy business pitches. They raised it by stealing. They sold my art studio out from under me while I was living overseas to bankroll this absolute sham of a company." A loud collective gasp rippled through the room. The venture capitalists in the front row exchanged horrified glances. These were men and women who managed billions of dollars, and they knew exactly what real estate fraud looked like. Arthur Sterling tightened his grip on his wooden cane, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He glared at Marcus with a look of pure murderous intent. My mother Eleanor could not handle the public exposure. Her perfect matriarch persona completely shattered under the weight of the undeniable truth. She lunged forward, pushing past a wealthy socialite to get closer to the stage. "You are a liar!" she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. She pointed a shaking finger at me. Her face twisted in absolute rage. "Do not listen to her. We did not steal anything. It was perfectly legal. We used a general power of attorney. She signed it over to us years ago. We had the legal right to liquidate her assets for the benefit of the family. She is just trying to destroy her brother because she is a bitter, ungrateful child." The church elders standing near the back of the room began to murmur among themselves. My mother was frantically trying to spin the narrative, relying on her decades of manipulating the congregation. She thought saying the words "power of attorney" would magically absolve her of the moral and legal bankruptcy of her actions. She wanted the elite crowd to believe this was simply a misunderstood family financial arrangement, rather than a calculated heist. I looked down at my mother. She was panting heavily, her luxury handbag clutched tightly against her chest. I did not yell back. I did not need to raise my voice to match her frantic energy. I simply let a cold, hard smile touch my lips. "Legal?" I asked, my voice echoing softly through the sound system. "Yes, the power of attorney document itself was technically a legal instrument. But was your sale of my property actually effective?" "No, not even close." I pressed a button on my phone, and the projected image changed. The quitclaim deed vanished entirely, replaced by a complex federal document bearing the official seal of the United States government. "You see, Mother?" I continued, pacing slowly across the stage. You and father were so blinded by your own greed that you failed to do any basic research. You saw a prime piece of commercial real estate and a daughter you thought was too weak to fight back. You assumed the power of attorney gave you absolute godlike control over my life and my finances. But a power of attorney only grants you the authority to manage assets that I personally own. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, allowing the heavy implication of my words to sink into the minds of the brilliant investors sitting in the audience. They were already starting to put the puzzle pieces together. I could see the dawning horror on the face of the lead venture capitalist. "I did not own that building when you sold it to Marcus," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "I gave up my personal ownership of that property 2 years ago. I placed the entire estate into a specialized federal preservation trust. I only held a lifetime lease to use the space for my art. You cannot sell a building you do not own. And you certainly cannot use a power of attorney to sell a building that belongs to the federal government." The ballroom erupted into chaos. The polite whispers turned into loud, angry shouts. Investors pulled out their phones, frantically dialing their legal teams to freeze any pending transfers. The pristine facade was entirely broken. My parents had publicly admitted to orchestrating a massive fraudulent real estate transaction right in front of the very people they were trying to defraud. Marcus fell to his knees on the stage, completely unable to support his own weight, as the reality of his impending prison sentence finally crushed him. The ballroom remained in a state of absolute pandemonium. Marcus remained slumped on the polished wooden stage, staring blankly at the floorboards as the wealthy investors continued to shout into their phones. But I was not finished. My parents had spent my entire life painting me as a financial burden, a useless dreamer who needed their constant charity and supervision. They used that exact narrative to justify robbing me. They convinced everyone in this room that I was desperate. I tapped the screen of my phone again, and the federal trust document vanished from the massive projector. In its place, a crisp, high-resolution scan of a banking ledger appeared on the screen. The logo at the top belonged to one of the most exclusive private wealth management firms in Switzerland. I let the audience read the numbers for themselves. "Look closely at the deposits," I instructed, my voice cutting effortlessly through the remaining murmurs in the room. "You have all been told that I am a struggling painter who finger paints for pennies. You were told my studio was just a useless hobby space wasting prime real estate. But if you look at the transaction history from my recent 6-month residency in Paris, you will see the exact opposite of a struggle." The ledger displayed on the giant screen showed 4 consecutive deposits. Each single transaction was well over 300,000 euros. They were direct wire transfers from the most prestigious contemporary art galleries across Europe. "I do not paint for pennies," I stated clearly, making sure every single person in the back rows could hear me. "My private commissions routinely sell for mid-6 figures, and I currently have a waiting list of elite buyers that stretches well into the next 3 years. The art you saw in the lobby tonight, the pieces Marcus threw in a dumpster and then desperately tried to claim as his own, were worth more than the entire seed capital he brought to this company." I swiped my screen again and a new document appeared. It was the original deed of sale for the studio building from 7 years ago, clearly showing my name and a zero balance. "When I bought that warehouse, I did not take out a commercial mortgage," I explained, walking slowly toward the edge of the stage. "I paid for the entire property in cash. I poured $500,000 of my own hard-earned money into structurally renovating it to premium museum quality standards long before I ever placed it into the federal trust. It was never a rundown shack dragging down the family portfolio. It was a highly valuable, debt-free asset that I owned, free and clear." I turned to look at my father, who was now standing completely frozen near the front row, his mouth hanging slightly open in pure shock. "You emptied my joint emergency savings account, claiming I owed you for raising me," I said to him, my tone completely devoid of mercy. "You thought taking $50,000 would leave me entirely destitute and desperate enough to obey you. You had absolutely no idea that the joint account was just a decoy. It was basically my petty cash fund, My actual wealth has been securely hidden away in protected offshore accounts completely out of your greedy reach for years. The elite investors in the audience were completely captivated by the display. The dynamic of the entire room had violently shifted. They were looking at me with a newfound, intense respect. I was no longer the crazy, jealous sister throwing a public tantrum. I was a self-made millionaire, a shrewd, highly intelligent businesswoman who had completely outplayed a room full of corporate sharks. Then their eyes slowly shifted back to Marcus. The contrast was absolutely devastating. Marcus was still kneeling in a puddle of his own nervous sweat, wearing an expensive tuxedo paid for by his father-in-law, trying to launch a fake tech company funded by a stolen building. He was nothing but an empty suit. He had never built anything successful in his entire life. The golden child, the supposed visionary CEO of the family, was a complete and utter financial illusion. He was completely broke and entirely dependent on the people he had scammed. Chloe stared up at me, her face entirely pale and trembling. Her wide eyes darted from the massive bank balances projected on the screen down to her pathetic husband kneeling on the floor. The brutal reality of her situation was rapidly crashing down on her. She had relentlessly mocked me at the cafe for not understanding real business, while she was legally binding her own wealth to a man who was an absolute fraud. "You wanted to know how real business works, Chloe?" I asked her softly, leaning slightly over the edge of the stage. "Let me show you exactly what happens when you do not read the fine print." I turned my attention back to the massive projection screen behind the stage. I tapped my phone one more time. The Swiss bank statements vanished entirely. In their place, a dense, heavily watermarked document appeared. It bore the unmistakable golden seal of the Department of the Interior and the bold heading of the National Register of Historic Places. The entire ballroom leaned forward in their seats. Arthur Sterling squinted his eyes, reading the dense legal text displayed in giant letters across the screen. I walked slowly, pacing the length of the polished wooden stage, making sure every single person in the room was listening closely to my next words. 2 years ago, I decided to do some deep structural renovations on my studio. I explained, my voice echoing clearly through the silent room. I wanted to expand my storage space into the lower foundation. But when my contractors broke through the basement wall, they did not find solid earth. They found a hidden sub-basement. It was a completely concealed room built deeply into the foundation itself, with a collapsed tunnel leading toward the old riverbeds. My parents stared at me completely bewildered. They had never cared enough to visit my studio or ask about my daily life, so this was entirely new information to them. I halted the renovations immediately. I continued. I brought in an independent team of historians and structural archaeologists from the local university. It took them 6 months of intense, careful research, but they finally verified exactly what we had found. My building was sitting directly on top of an unrecorded crucial stop on the Underground Railroad. It was a physical piece of deep, profound history. It was a sacred place where people who looked like me fought for their absolute freedom. A hushed, reverent murmur swept through the crowd. Even the wealthy venture capitalists looked deeply moved by the sudden revelation. My father, Reverend Thomas, turned visibly pale. He built his entire church reputation on uplifting the Black community, and he had just unknowingly bulldozed a major piece of our own heritage. "When you own a piece of history like that, you do not just pave over it," I said, looking directly at Marcus, who was still trembling on the floor. "You protect it at all costs." I knew that the commercial real estate market in Chicago was incredibly aggressive. I knew that one day someone with deep pockets and absolutely no moral compass would try to tear that historic building down to build a shiny glass tech hub or a luxury condo tower. I wanted to make sure that could absolutely never happen. "So I made a very permanent legal decision," I announced, gesturing up to the massive federal document projected on the screen. I worked directly with the State Historical Society and top federal preservation lawyers. I took the deed to my fully paid-off $1.5 million property, and I completely surrendered it. I placed the entire building and the land it sits on into an irrevocable federal historical trust. Chloe let out a small, suffocated gasp. Her wealthy father, Arthur Sterling, closed his eyes and slowly shook his head from side to side, finally realizing the absolute catastrophe his entitled daughter had married into. An irrevocable trust means exactly what it sounds like, I explained, speaking slowly and clearly so my family could understand the exact magnitude of their catastrophic failure. It cannot be undone. It cannot be reversed or altered. Once I signed that paperwork, I ceased to be the legal owner of the property. The federal government became the absolute sovereign owner of that land, holding it in perpetual trust for historical preservation. I looked down at my mother, who was gripping the edge of a cocktail table to keep her legs from collapsing. In exchange for donating the property, I was granted a specialized lifetime lease, I told her. The lease allowed me to occupy the upper floors and operate my art studio completely rent-free for the rest of my natural life. But it explicitly stripped me of any right to sell, mortgage, or transfer the property title to anyone else ever again. I only owned a lease. I did not own the building. The profound silence in the ballroom was suddenly broken by a sharp, bitter laugh from Arthur Sterling. He pounded his heavy wooden cane against the marble floor. "You fools," he muttered, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You absolute arrogant fools." I nodded in agreement with the billionaire. "Exactly, Arthur," I said, looking back at my terrified family. My parents thought they were executing a brilliant financial scheme. They thought their outdated power of attorney gave them the right to steal my property. But you cannot steal something I do not legally own. You cannot force a commercial sale on a property that belongs entirely to the United States government. The $1.5 million real estate sale that Marcus used to secure his venture capital funding was not just a simple administrative mistake. It was a completely fraudulent transaction based on a fundamentally worthless piece of paper. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking directly at the lead investors sitting in the front row. They were already frantically texting their legal departments, but I needed them to hear the full extent of my brother's incompetence. A power of attorney is a powerful legal tool. I explained, my voice steady and commanding, but it has one very simple, very unbreakable limitation. It only grants the agent the authority to act on behalf of the principal regarding assets the principal actually holds in their own name. My parents were so blinded by their own arrogance that they did not even bother to run a basic title search before they drafted the sale documents. They assumed they knew everything. They took a 5-year-old medical power of attorney, marched into a discount real estate broker's office, and signed away a property I had legally surrendered to the United States government 24 months prior. The broker saw the old deed, saw their familiar faces, and pushed the paperwork through without waiting for the county clerk to verify the updated federal trust registry. My mother let out a small, choked sob, covering her face with both hands. She was finally realizing that her desperate attempt to secure the golden child's future had just placed her right in the middle of a federal fraud investigation. She and my father had forged a real estate transaction on a national heritage site, and because they forced that fraudulent sale through, I continued pivoting my attention back to Marcus. "I have to ask you a very serious question about your venture capital funding. When you signed the paperwork to secure that $3 million seed money, what exactly did you use to back the loan?" Marcus did not answer. He was completely catatonic, kneeling in the center of the stage with his head bowed. The heavy silence in the ballroom was thick with impending doom. "You used the building," I answered for him, projecting my voice to reach the very back of the room. "You leveraged the commercial property title as the primary collateral for your corporate loan. You told these brilliant investors that you owned a prime piece of Chicago real estate, free and clear. You used it to guarantee their massive financial investment." I turned back to the audience, making direct eye contact with the lead venture capitalist. "Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Williams did not pledge a commercial asset to secure your money. Because the title he holds is completely fabricated, He inadvertently pledged a federally protected historical monument as his corporate collateral. He legally offered United States government property to back a tech startup that does not even have a working prototype. The lead venture capitalist, a stern-looking man with silver hair, stood up from his seat. His face was a mask of absolute fury. He pointed a long, angry finger directly at my brother. "We will have you in federal court by Monday morning, you absolute fraud," he shouted. "We are freezing every single cent of the bridge loan, and we are pressing criminal charges for wire fraud and falsifying corporate assets. You stole millions of dollars under false pretenses." Arthur Sterling, who was standing right next to the investor, slammed his heavy cane against the marble floor again. "And I am withdrawing my personal guarantee on that bridge loan." Arthur roared, his voice shaking with rage. "You lied to my face, Marcus. You sat in my office and told me the Environmental Protection Agency raid was a minor zoning dispute. You dragged my family name and my personal wealth into a federal crime." Chloe let out a piercing shriek of pure panic. "Daddy, no!" she cried out, rushing to the edge of the stage. "You cannot withdraw the guarantee. The contractors will sue us. The bank will seize my trust fund. Please, Daddy, you have to fix this." Arthur looked at his daughter with a mixture of profound disappointment and cold detachment. "I warned you about marrying a man with no real assets, Chloe," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. "You made your bed with this pathetic liar. Now you get to sleep in it. I am calling my lawyers right now. You are entirely on your own." Chloe collapsed onto the stage right next to Marcus, crying hysterically and pulling at her expensive blonde hair. The polished high society couple was completely undone, reduced to a sobbing mess on the floor of their own fake victory party. I looked at my parents standing paralyzed near the front row. The prestigious Reverend Thomas and his perfect wife, Eleanor, were entirely exposed. The church elders who had texted me such hateful messages were staring at them with utter disgust. They had used their religion to justify stealing, and now the entire community was watching them burn in the fire they had built themselves. But the trap was not entirely sprung yet. There was still one final piece of the puzzle that Marcus needed to understand. One final document he had willingly signed that would ensure he could never, ever walk away from this disaster. Chloe staggered to her feet, her mascara running down her flushed cheeks in dark, chaotic streaks. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. "But you signed the quitclaim deed last week," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent grand ballroom. "You met us at the high-end notary office. You sat at that mahogany table, you read the paperwork, and you signed the document right in front of us. You gave the property to Marcus. We have the stamped document to prove it. You cannot take it back now." I looked at her desperate, tear-stained face and let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. The sound cut through the heavy tension in the room like a cold blade. "Chloe, you pride yourself on coming from a wealthy real estate family," I said, slowly pacing toward her. "Your father builds massive commercial skyscrapers across Chicago. Did he really never bother to teach you the basic legal definition of a quitclaim deed?" Arthur Sterling groaned loudly from the front row, covering his face with his weathered hand. He knew exactly what was coming. He recognized the catastrophic legal trap his daughter had blindly walked right into. "A quitclaim deed does not guarantee a clear and free title," I explained, projecting my voice so the investors could hear every single word. "It offers absolutely no warranties of ownership. It does not verify that the grantor actually owns the property. A quitclaim deed simply transfers whatever legal interest I currently hold at that exact moment in time. If I own the building, you get the building. But if I only own a highly restrictive lifetime lease to occupy a federal trust property, then congratulations. That is exactly what you just acquired." Chloe stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The reality of her own ignorance was finally suffocating her. The smug, high society attitude she had weaponized against me at the cafe was entirely gone. By forcing me to sign that document and formally filing it with the county clerk, you did not take ownership of the land. I continued shifting my gaze to Marcus, who was still kneeling helplessly on the stage. You legally assumed my position as the primary occupant of the federal monument. You eagerly and completely voluntarily absorbed every single ounce of liability attached to that historic lease. Marcus slowly raised his head. His eyes were completely bloodshot, filled with a level of pure terror I had never seen in him before. His tailored midnight blue tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume. I tapped my phone screen one more time. The giant projection behind the stage shifted instantly. The federal trust certificate disappeared and was replaced by the incredibly dense text of the original occupant lease agreement. I had digitally highlighted one specific paragraph in bright neon yellow so nobody in the massive ballroom could possibly miss it. Did you read the fine print before you called your investors to brag, Marcus? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, unyielding whisper. Did you even bother to look at Clause 4.b of the Occupant Liability Agreement before you sent your demolition crew to my studio? Marcus did not turn around to look at the screen. He was physically shaking, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw breath. I will read it for you, I offered cheerfully. Stepping up to the edge of the stage, Clause 4.b explicitly states that any occupant who initiates, authorizes, or executes unauthorized structural demolition on this protected heritage site automatically waives all rights to legal arbitration. The occupant accepts full and immediate financial liability for the destruction of federal property. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the soft mechanical hum of the projector fan. The wealthy elite were watching a man get legally executed on stage. When you filed that quitclaim deed, you officially became the occupant, I stated, driving the final nail into his coffin. And when you sent that bulldozer crashing through the 19th century floorboards last Thursday, you officially became the destroyer of a national monument. You did not just break a minor zoning rule, Marcus. You triggered an automatic, non-negotiable federal penalty. Chloe let out another piercing wail, dropping back down to her knees. She grabbed her father's pant leg, begging him to do something to fix the nightmare. But Arthur Sterling stepped back firmly, pulling his leg away from her grasp. He looked down at his daughter with absolute disgust, treating her like radioactive waste. He was already mentally drafting the documents to sever his financial ties to her husband. You thought you were so incredibly smart, I said, looking down at my brother. You thought you could bully the quiet artist into giving up her property so you could play billionaire for a day. You dragged me into a police interrogation room. You threatened to ruin my career. You tried to give me a felony record. You did everything in your power to destroy me. I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute freedom rushing through my veins. But you forgot one very important thing, I concluded. I am an artist. I spend months meticulously planning every single detail of a canvas before I ever let a brush touch the paint. You rushed in blind, trying to steal a masterpiece you did not understand. And now you are going to pay the ultimate price for your sheer arrogance. I turned my attention back to the screen. I was not entirely finished reading the clause. I pointed to the bottom half of the highlighted text. The financial liability is not a vague estimation, I told the silent crowd. The Federal Preservation Trust dictates a very specific mathematical equation for the destruction of an unrecorded heritage site. But to save you all the trouble of doing the math, the exact baseline penalty for the structural damage you caused on Thursday morning is $10 million. The collective intake of breath from the audience sounded like a vacuum pulling the air from the room. $10 million. It was an astronomical sum. It is a non-negotiable federal fine, I added smoothly. It cannot be discharged in a corporate bankruptcy court. It cannot be settled for pennies on the dollar. The federal government will completely liquidate every single asset the occupant holds until that $10 million is paid in full. Marcus buried his face in his hands. He did not even have $10,000 to his name, let alone $10 million. Arthur Sterling let out a harsh, dry cough. He adjusted his suit jacket, looking down at my brother with absolute contempt. Well, Marcus, it looks like you will be spending the rest of your miserable life working off a federal debt in a prison cafeteria, Arthur stated coldly. As I said before, I am withdrawing my bridge loan guarantee immediately. Sterling Real Estate Group will have absolutely no part in this financial suicide. Arthur turned to leave the front row. He was ready to walk out of the ballroom and leave his daughter and her husband to burn. "Not so fast, Arthur," I called out, stopping him in his tracks. "You might want to stay and hear the rest of the financial forecast before you call your lawyers." Arthur slowly turned back around. He gripped his heavy wooden cane, his eyes narrowing at me. "I have nothing to do with this boy or his fraudulent lease," he growled. "I only co-signed his temporary construction loan." I smiled, offering him a look of deep artificial sympathy. "That is what Marcus told you, Arthur," I corrected him, "but that is not what actually happened in the paperwork." I tapped my phone and brought up a new document. It was the State Business Registry filing for Apex Tech. When Marcus formed his limited liability company, he did not have the credit score to secure a commercial lease transfer, I explained. He needed a highly qualified guarantor to pass the title insurance underwriting process. He needed someone with massive liquid assets to co-sign the actual corporate entity establishing Apex Tech. Arthur Sterling's face suddenly lost all of its color. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped onto a live landmine. "You did not just co-sign a simple bridge loan, Arthur," I told the billionaire. "You co-signed the operating agreement for Apex Tech. You legally bound yourself as the primary financial guarantor for the company itself, which means when Marcus assumed the liability of the occupant lease, you automatically assumed the exact same liability." The silence in the room was so heavy it felt physically crushing. "You are on the hook." "Arthur," I announced, my voice ringing with crystal clear finality. "You co-signed for the destruction of a federal historical monument. The $10 million fine does not just fall on Marcus. It falls directly onto the Sterling Real Estate Group. The federal government will be coming after your commercial properties, your bank accounts, and your corporate trust funds to collect their money." Arthur Sterling stumbled backward. His heavy cane clattered against the marble floor as he grabbed his chest. The invincible Chicago billionaire was suddenly hyperventilating. He had spent his entire life building an untouchable real estate empire, and his spoiled daughter had just handed it to the federal government on a silver platter. Chloe scrambled toward her father, but he forcefully shoved her away. "Do not touch me!" Arthur roared, his voice cracking with unprecedented panic. "You ruined me. You absolutely ruined me." The venture capitalists in the front row immediately began physically backing away from Arthur. In the corporate world, a $10 million federal penalty was a highly contagious disease. Nobody wanted to be standing near the blast radius when the government auditors arrived. The elite attendees who had been sipping champagne just an hour ago were now watching the absolute dismantling of a real estate dynasty. My parents watched the destruction of the Sterling family with wide, terrified eyes. They had thought allying themselves with Chloe's rich family would elevate their social status. Instead, they had dragged a ruthless billionaire down into the mud with them. My mother leaned heavily against my father, looking as though she might faint at any given second. The trap was flawlessly executed. The arrogant tech bro, the entitled wife, the corrupt parents, and the ruthless billionaire were all drowning in the exact same sinking ship. They had all played a part in trying to destroy my life and my art. Now they were bound together by a $10 million chain that would drag them all directly to the bottom of the ocean. The venture capitalists did not wait for another explanation. The silver-haired lead investor spun on his heel and marched directly toward the heavy brass doors. "Get legal on the phone right now," he shouted to his assistant, who was practically sprinting to keep up with him. "I want a wire fraud lawsuit filed against Marcus Williams and Apex Tech before the courts open on Monday. I want their accounts frozen, and I want the federal authorities notified that they used fraudulent collateral to secure our capital." The rest of the elite guests immediately followed his lead. It was a mass exodus of borrowed wealth and fake prestige. Nobody wanted their name associated with a $10 million federal crime. The socialites, the church elders, and the real estate tycoons practically trampled each other to get out of the grand ballroom. Within 60 seconds, the massive, luxurious space was completely hollowed out, leaving behind a deafening silence. Arthur Sterling remained standing near the front row, his chest heaving with violent breaths. He looked down at Marcus, who was still weeping pathetic apologies onto the polished stage floor. Arthur dropped his heavy wooden cane, letting it clatter loudly against the marble. He reached down, grabbed the lapels of my brother's expensive midnight blue tuxedo, and hauled him roughly to his feet. Marcus dangled there like a broken, fragile puppet. "You worthless, parasitic little boy!" Arthur hissed, his voice vibrating with lethal fury. "You lied to my face and destroyed my empire." Arthur pulled his arm back and delivered a brutal, open-handed slap directly across my brother's face. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot through the empty ballroom. Marcus crumpled instantly, falling back onto the floor with a loud groan, clutching his bleeding lip. Chloe watched her father physically assault her husband. Instead of rushing to defend the man she supposedly loved, her ruthless self-preservation instincts immediately activated. She looked at Marcus bleeding on the stage and made a cold, calculated decision. She scrambled backward, putting as much physical distance between herself and her husband as possible, her designer trench coat slipping off her shoulders in the process. "I want a divorce!" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing shrilly in the massive room. "I am calling my lawyers right now, Marcus. I am completely divorcing you. You are not going to drag my trust fund into a federal indictment. You are a disgusting scammer, and I will make sure the judge knows I had absolutely nothing to do with your fraudulent company." Marcus reached a shaking hand toward her, pleading with her through his tears. "Chloe, please," he sobbed, his voice thick with panic and blood. "We are a team. You cannot leave me like this." Chloe physically kicked his hand away, stepping backward until she bumped into her father. "I do not know you," she spat venomously. While the Sterling family tore itself apart, my parents stood completely frozen by the melting ice sculpture. The sheer gravity of the legal trap was finally crushing the air out of their lungs. Reverend Thomas turned his head to look at Eleanor. His face was entirely devoid of color, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice trembling violently. "The broker. We signed the transfer papers at the broker. We used the bank to route Zara Savings to pay the fees." My mother let out a low, terrified whimper, gripping her luxury handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. They were finally connecting the dots. They had not just made a simple clerical error. By initiating the illegal sale of a federal trust property, using a defunct power of attorney, and routing stolen money across state lines, they had committed multiple severe federal offenses. They were primary accessories to bank fraud and wire fraud. They were the ones who handed Marcus the loaded gun. "We are going to prison," my father choked out, staggering backward until his shoulders hit the wall. "The church, the congregation, we are going to lose everything." My mother finally collapsed, sinking to her knees right there on the cold marble floor. The perfect, pristine matriarch was gone, replaced by a broken criminal facing the absolute destruction of her holy facade. They had traded their own daughter for a few fleeting moments of fake high society glory, and the massive bill had finally come due. I stood alone on the stage, looking down at the absolute wreckage of the people who had tried to bury me. The catered food sat untouched on silver platters. The expensive champagne was completely flat. I calmly reached down and unplugged my phone from the audio-visual cable. The giant projection screen instantly went dark, leaving only the harsh gallery spotlights illuminating my stolen paintings. The launch gala of Apex Tech was officially over, and their entire empire had crumbled into dust. Exactly 1 month later, the Chicago skyline looked entirely different from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new downtown gallery penthouse. The morning sun poured over the pristine hardwood floors, illuminating a massive open space filled with natural light and the comforting scent of expensive oil paints. I stood barefoot on the warm wood, holding a crystal flute of genuine vintage champagne. It tasted infinitely better than the cheap celebratory wine my family had poured at their fraudulent gala. I took a slow, deliberate sip and directed my attention to the sleek, flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. The local morning news anchor was looking directly into the camera, her expression perfectly serious as she delivered the top story of the hour. The graphic flashing at the bottom of the screen read, "The Fall of Apex Tech and the Williams Family Scandal." I reached for the silver remote and turned the volume up just a few notches. The fallout from the disastrous tech launch continues to rock the Chicago business world, the anchor announced, her voice crisp and professional. Earlier this morning, federal prosecutors officially unsealed a 22-count indictment against Marcus Williams, the disgraced founder of Apex Tech. Williams is facing severe charges including wire fraud, bank fraud, and the unlawful destruction of a federally protected historical monument. The screen cut to live footage outside the federal courthouse. Marcus was being escorted down the concrete steps by two stern-looking federal marshals. He looked absolutely unrecognizable. The arrogant smirk and the tailored midnight blue tuxedo were completely gone. He was wearing an oversized gray county jumpsuit, his hands heavily cuffed in front of him. His shoulders were slumped, and he kept his eyes glued to the pavement, avoiding the blinding flashes of the aggressive paparazzi cameras. There was no wealthy wife standing by his side to bail him out. Chloe had filed for an expedited divorce the very next morning, taking her intact trust fund and fleeing to a private resort in the Maldives. Her billionaire father, Arthur Sterling, had aggressively severed all legal and financial ties to Marcus, leaving my brother to face the full wrath of the $10 million federal penalty entirely alone. The news anchor seamlessly transitioned to the next segment of the scandal. But the legal troubles do not end with the young CEO, she continued. His parents, prominent community leaders Reverend Thomas and Eleanor Williams, are now facing their own devastating legal battles. Following an intense internal investigation by the church elders, Reverend Thomas was officially forced to resign in absolute disgrace. Footage of my father's beloved church flashed across the screen. The massive wooden doors were locked tight. A temporary banner hung across the brick exterior, announcing the search for a new lead pastor. To cover the mounting legal retainers for their suspected involvement in initiating the fraudulent real estate transfer, the anchor explained the Williams family was forced to liquidate their primary assets. The historic family estate in the suburbs was sold at a steep loss in a desperate public auction yesterday afternoon. I watched the drone footage of my childhood home. The beautiful manicured lawn was cluttered with moving boxes. A bright red foreclosure sign was hammered brutally into the front yard. They had lost absolutely everything. The pristine reputation, the community power, and the generational wealth they had tried to steal from me had all evaporated in less than 30 days. They were completely bankrupt, publicly humiliated, and facing the very real possibility of federal prison time for their roles in the bank fraud. The universe had delivered its cold, calculated karma with absolute precision. I pressed the power button on the remote. The television screen instantly went black, cutting off the news anchor's voice and plunging the massive penthouse back into a serene, comforting silence. I set the remote down on a glass coffee table right next to my cell phone. Just as my hand pulled away, the phone screen lit up with a bright notification. It vibrated softly against the glass. I glanced down. It was a text message from a blocked number, but I knew exactly who was sending it. I read the preview text glowing on the screen. "Zara, please." The message read, "We have absolutely nothing left. The lawyers took the last of the savings. We are staying in a cheap motel by the highway. Your father's heart cannot take this stress. He is asking for you. We are so sorry for everything. Please just call us back. We are still your family." I stood there for a long moment staring down at the glowing words. A month ago, that message would have triggered a massive wave of anxiety and guilt. They were trying to play the exact same emotional manipulation cards they had used my entire life. They were demanding my sympathy after spending weeks trying to systematically destroy my freedom and my career. But as I looked at the desperate pleading text, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger left in my chest, There was no lingering sadness or bitter resentment. There was only a profound, unbreakable emptiness where my familial obligations used to be. They were strangers to me now, strangers who had made a terrible gamble and lost everything. I reached down and picked up the phone. I did not type out a furious reply. I did not call them to gloat or demand a better apology. I simply held down the side button until the power off slider appeared on the screen. I swiped my finger across the glass. The phone vibrated one final time before shutting down completely, severing my last remaining tether to their toxic world. I tossed the dead phone into a nearby desk drawer and pushed it shut. I picked up my champagne flute and took one last celebratory sip. Then I walked across the warm hardwood floor toward the center of the penthouse. A massive blank canvas stood waiting on a heavy wooden easel, bathed in the bright morning sunlight. I picked up my favorite brush, dipped it into a rich, vibrant pool of cobalt blue paint, and took a deep, steadying breath. I pressed the wet bristles against the pristine white canvas. For the very first time in my entire life, I felt nothing but pure, unbothered peace. The saga of Zara and her family illustrates a harsh but necessary truth about human relationships. Blood does not automatically entitle anyone to your peace, your assets, or your future. The most profound lesson woven through this story is the absolute necessity of establishing and enforcing ironclad boundaries, especially with those who weaponize guilt and familial duty. For years, Zara's family operated on the arrogant assumption that her quiet nature equated to weakness. They used their social standing, religious influence, and relentless emotional manipulation to extract her resources. They fully expected her to fold under the suffocating weight of their collective expectations. This mirrors a painful reality many people face in their own lives. Toxic dynamics thrive and escalate when the victim remains silent and compliant. However, Zara's ultimate triumph did not come from matching their screaming, chaotic energy. It came from her cold, calculated understanding of her own inherent value and her meticulous legal preparation. She recognized that true power lies in walking away from a rigged game and letting the consequences of the abuser's own blind entitlement catch up to them. The spectacular downfall of Marcus, Eleanor, and Thomas was entirely self-inflicted. It was born from their stubborn refusal to respect Zara as an independent, capable adult. When we allow fear and guilt to govern our financial or emotional decisions, we only enable further toxic behavior. Zara's steadfast refusal to be the sacrificial lamb for her brother's fragile ego teaches us a vital lesson. Walking away is not an act of malice or spite. It is an act of profound self-preservation and deep self-respect. True peace is earned by finally cutting ties with those who consistently demand your destruction for their own temporary comfort. Evaluate your own inner circle today and dare to enforce the firm boundaries that protect your personal well-being.